Okay, hi everyone. Welcome back to this live stream for Windows Server 2003. So I'll just share our screen. Okay, the IP security policy management Snap-in. IPsec is managed through the IP Security Policy Management Snap-in, referred to as the IPsec Snap-in throughout this chapter. There's no pre-built MMC console that includes this snap-in, so you have to create one by opening a console and adding the snap-in to it. When you install the IPsec snap-in, you must choose whether you want to use it to manage a local IPsec policy, the default policy for the domain controller for the domain your computer is in, the default policy for another domain, or the local policy on another computer. This gives you an effective way to delegate control over IPsec policies should you choose to do so. Exercise 4.1 leads you through the process of installing the snap-in for managing a local policy and then activating IPsec on the local computer. Enabling IPsec on the local computer. 1. Click Start, Run, type MMC and click OK. An empty MMC console window appears. 2. Select File, Add, Remove Snap-in. When the Add, Remove Snap-in dialog box appears, click the Add button. 3. In the Add Standalone Snap-in dialog box, select IP Security Policy Management and click the Add button. 4. The Select Computer or Domain dialog box appears. Select the local computer default setting radio button and then click the Finish button. 5. Click the Close button in the Add Standalone Snap-in dialog box. 6. Click the OK button in the Add Remove Snap-in dialog box. 7. Select the IP security policies on local computer node in the MMC. Note that the right pane of the MMC lists the 3 predefined policies discussed earlier in this chapter. 8. Right-click the server, request security policy and choose the assign command. 9. Verify that the entry in the policy assigned column for the pre-selected policy has changed to yes. This process in and of itself doesn't do much to improve your security posture, because all it does is enable your computer to accept IPsec connections from other computers. The real payoff comes when you start applying IPsec policies in Active Directory, which we'll show you how to do next. Configuring IPsec. You can configure IPsec by modifying the default policies, creating your own policies that embody the rules and filters you want to use, and controlling how policies get applied to computers in your management scope. You manage policies at a variety of levels depending on where you want them applied. However, you always use the IPsec snap-in to manage them, and the tools you use to create new policies or edit existing ones are the same whether you're using local or Active Directory policy storage. Because group policy management is outside the range of this book, the following sections will focus instead on how you customize and control the IPsec settings themselves. Creating a new policy. To create a new policy, right-click the IP Security Policies folder in the snap-in and choose the Create IP Security Policy command. This activates the IP Security Policy wizard, which allows you to create a new policy. You still have to manually edit the policy settings after it's created. The first 2 screens of the wizard are pretty straightforward. The first page tells you what the wizard does, and the second page allows you to enter a name and a description for the policy. Once you have entered the name and a description of your policy, the Requests for Secure Communications page, see Figure 4.2, asks you whether you want to use the default rule or not. So Figure 4.2, the Request for Secure Communications page. Okay, so the default response rule is what governs security when no other filter rule applies. For example, let's say you've set up security filters to accept secure connections from star.microsoft.com, star.cisco.com, and star.apple.com. When your server gets an incoming IPsec request from hawk.chalice.net, you'd probably expect IPsec to reject the connection, and it will unless you leave the default response rule turned on. That rule basically accepts anyone who requests a secure connection. Paradoxically, for maximum security, you might want to turn it off so that you only accept IPsec connections from known hosts. However, you can customize the settings associated with the default rule. If you choose to use the default response rule, you will have to configure an authentication method for it. To do this, you will use the default response rule authentication method page, see figure 4.3. You can choose one of the 3 authentication methods mentioned earlier. By default, Kerberos is selected, but you can choose a certificate authority or a pre-shared key instead. If you choose to use a pre-shared key, make sure that you enter the same key on both ends of the connection. The final page of the IP security wizard contains a checkbox labeled Edit Properties. Click on it to access the actual settings embedded within the policy. After you finish the wizard, you will learn about policy properties in more detail later in this chapter in the section configuring IPsec policies, storing policies in Active Directory. So far, you've read only about the managing policies that apply to the local computer. You can also use the IPsec snap-in to create and manage policies that are stored in Active Directory, from which they can be applied to any computer or group of computers in the domain. You actually accomplish this application by completing these 3 separate but related steps. 1. Target the IPsec snap-in at Active Directory and then open it while you're logged in with a privileged account. 2. Edit or create the policy you want to apply using the tools in the snap-in. 3. Use the group policy snap-in to attach the policy to a site, domain, or organizational unit. The first 2 steps are discussed throughout this chapter, but you should first take a minute to read about the 3rd step, because you can assign group policies to any site, domain, or organizational unit. You have the ability to fine-tune IPsec policies throughout your entire organization by using an appropriately targeted policy. For example, in Active Directory users and computers, you can create an organizational unit, OU, and then create a new group policy object, GPO, that applies only to that OU. Finally, you can change the settings in the GPO so they enforce the IPsec policy you want applied to computers in the OU. You don't actually use the IPsec snap-in to assign policies. You use it to configure them and to create policies that live in Active Directory. When you want to actually apply a policy to some group in the Active Directory, you use the group policy snap-in itself. In exercise 4.2, you will configure a default IPsec policy for all domain computers. You must have administrative access to the domain for this to work. So exercise 4.2, enabling IPsec for an entire domain. Click Start Run, type MMC and click OK. An empty MMC console window appears. 2. Select File, Add, Remove, Snap-in. When the Add, Remove, Snap-in dialog box appears, click the Add button. 3. In the Add Standalone Snap-in dialog box, select Group Policy Object Editor and click the Add button. 4. The Select Group Policy Object dialog box appears. Click the Browse button to bring up the Browse for a Group Policy Object dialog box. 5. Select Default Domain Policy and click the OK button. 6. Click the Finish button in the Select Group Policy Object dialog box. 7. Click the Close button in the Add Standalone Snap-in dialog box, and then click the OK button in the Add Remove Snap-in dialog box. 8. Select Domain Policy, Computer Configuration, Windows Settings, Security Settings, IP Security Policies on Active Directory domain name. 9. Select the IP security policies on Active Directory domain name item. The right side of the MMC window lists the available policies, including the 3 predefined policies and any new ones you've added using the IPsec policy wizard. 10. Right-click the server, request security policy, and select the Assign command. Notice that the policy assigned column for that policy now reads yes. 11. Save the console for later use. IPsec policies are subject to the same rules that other objects assigned by the group policy are subject to. Even though this book isn't about group policy objects, it's useful to understand those rules so you'll know how IPsec policy assignment really works. The first rule is simple. A policy applied at the domain level will always override a policy assigned to the local computer. When you're logged onto the domain, of course, the second rule is equally simple. A policy applied to an organizational unit always takes precedence over domain level policies. That means that if you have conflicting policies at the domain and OU levels, the settings in the OU policy will be used unless overrides are in place. The third rule is a little more complex. If you have a hierarchy of OUs set up in Active Directory, the policy for the lowest level OU overrides the others. For example, let's say you have an OU named Sales with subordinate OUs for North America and South America. If you assign 2 different IPsec policies to the Sales and North America OUs, the North America settings will take precedence. The fourth rule is subtle but important. If you assign an IPsec policy through group policy and then remove the group policy object used to assign the policy remains in effect when the IPsec policy agent looks for the policy. While the GPO is missing, the agent assumes that the GPO server is temporarily unavailable. It then uses a cached copy of the policy, which means that you have to unassign the policy before removing the GPO you used to assign it, and then either refresh the policy on each client computer or wait for the automatic refresh to take place. So I'm going to leave it here for this live stream. If you like listening, please consider like, sharing, and subscribing. Thank you.